Hello and welcome, everyone. We're really excited to be here today, kicking off our first episode of Dissolving the Divide with Derek Bartolicelli and myself, Leslie Powers. And our first guest is Brandon Spencer today. So excited to get going on this. And just for a quick recap of what we're here to do, Dissolving the Divide is a brainstorm of Derek's, and he came to me with this idea, and I had been thinking about it at the same time about how important it is for us to address and dissolve all the division that's going on in the world. It's unnecessary, and taking us away from what our true focus should be, which is to claim our freedom, our true freedom. And the dialectics that are going on in the world today are multiple and they are divisive. So here we are here to have some ongoing discussions of how we can dissolve the conflict, dissolve and integrate these topics into a synthesis that will allow us to move forward in peace and harmony and freedom with a basis in truth. So with that, I'm going to pass over to Derek so he can introduce our guest today.
Yeah, Leslie, thanks so much. And I'm really excited and pleased, always honored to speak with Brandon because, him and I go way back, as far back as the headdress of Mayat and her feather, which we try to live by as light within our hearts. And I think this segment is going to be perfect to delve in with Brandon because, speaking over many months with him and even like getting into personal life stuff, just sharing, some of the trials and tribulations and just better self-mastery, discipline. He's big on that. And just the lessons of Mayat and this goddess and what she represents, which is why I held the tarot card of, justice, which, represents natural law. And it is that balance, and finding that balance within ourselves is really where it first starts off with. So Brandon, I'll let you take it on from there, brother. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me on, Leslie and Derek. It is a pleasure. I enjoy the work that both of you put out. So I know it's going to be a wonderful, conversation. So I'm really, honored to be the first guest on your Dissolving the Divide show. So
great. Yeah. So maybe just to share a little bit about each of our background and what brings us up to this place. I'll just share a little bit. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in the state of California. I've had my master's degree in social work and been in the field for over 30 years in a whole variety of settings. And I've been delving into doing mental health counseling over the last decade with folks with complex trauma. And so there's a lot of elements of divide within people, and a lot of my work has been to help integrate individuals. And so I think today's topic will be really exciting. And Brandon, you chose the topic about the internal divide, right? So
yes. And to kind of get into my background and what I do, because I've umpired fast pitch softball. It's been 17 years. I started like young. It's been so long. And I've traveled, the country. But one thing as a umpire, one thing that I've learned is it deals with a lot of psychology because I'm constantly dealing with people. And I'm dealing with people in an environment that involves their kids, that involves, their children. So once things start to not go well, in this environment, then people kind of show their negative programming. And I've experienced it so many times is I'll get to a certain game and they'll say, oh, Blue, Brandon, you're our favorite umpire. And then you call their kid out and then they start screaming, oh, you're the worst umpire. And I'm like, hold on, like you just said that I was, your favorite umpire. Then 5 minutes later, you're calling me the worst umpire. So you're kind of, displaying that internal, division. And I started to, realize this the more and more that I started to educate myself and started to do research and started to become more knowledgeable. And the one thing that I always use that as a frame health reference is to make sure that I myself am not falling for that same health division. And then if I am, then it's up for me to help heal myself and change that, because I don't want to be, falling for those fallacies, or, falling for that dialectic. And I always use that as pretty much a way to measure, how myself, scales, her weight, her measurement, to make sure that I myself am not doing those same things. Because a lot of us will, will fall for these forms of negative programming. We'll be triggered. We'll hear someone say something. We'll see a symbol. We'll see a speech. We'll see a certain person, and then we'll lash out, and we'll kind of revert back to that childlike state, that form of regression, or whatever form of programming. And that's what I've seen within thousands and thousands of people and thousands of interactions. And I've traveled all across the country, dealing with all sorts of individuals. And I've seen this same form of internal health division within people, because so many people think that the division is externally, but it starts off on the internal plane, because by law, it can't happen on the external plane without first happening on that corresponding plane, which is that internal, realm. And that's where the true health division happens, because we hear the term divide and conquer. It's divide internally, then conquer externally. And that's what we have seen.
Great summary. Yeah.
Yeah, Brandon, totally. Just real quick, because I was laughing before, because I could totally relate. And yeah, you and I have been having some cool conversations about that. And I can relate because I've been a soccer referee and a baseball umpire, kind of making money on the side as a young adolescent. I didn't take it further than that. But yeah, just being in that zone of neutrality and like these opposing sides and this and that. And you got folks that are, they're like fair weather fans of yours, in a sense, like, but they'll turn on you when, like
Right.
you said. And it's just interesting how people get so triggered by these, and it's, yeah, these like tribal competitive sports and this and that. It kind of, tugs at that primitive part of the brain a little bit, and just, yeah, the knee-jerk reactional type of things. That's really interesting. And yeah, it's interesting also, Brandon, when you're saying of like, yeah, when you're in that zone umpiring and stuff, you said like do you want to mention that real quick if it applies to?
Yeah, when I'm in, the zone, which that's what I call it, because I have to take in a lot of information, and the level that I call at is a very high level. It's pretty much a tier right underneath Health Division 1. So a lot of the older girls who I call games for, they're already committed to like top schools. So they are extremely competitive. So just being in that zone, I have to, be able to take in a lot of information fast. But then two, just making sure that I'm in that center, because I've actually experimented with this for years, like being kind of overzealous, or kind of, cocky, and then kind of being more toward the extremities of, just kind of emotional, and it never works out well. So just making sure that I'm still balanced, to be able to take in as much information to be able to process it. Because if I go behind the plate and I'm not feeling well, or my emotions are getting the best of me, or I'm super excited, I'm more liable to miss a call. And I consciously know this, because after doing something 1,000 times, you become consciously aware of it through pattern recognition. But then two, making sure that I'm still balanced enough to still be able to focus and still take in information. And then two, like I said earlier, make sure that I myself am still, maintaining my principles, my boundaries, and enforcing those rules, and seeing like, hey, the way that these spectators and parents are acting, still being consciously held aware to make sure that, I'm not going to fall for or be triggered, by whatever they say. Because in Derek, when you umpire, you're going to be called everything freaking in the book. You're going to be threatened. You're going to be called all kinds of names, but that doesn't give you a reason to falter. That doesn't give you a reason to lash out and react in the same way that they are acting. So you still have to make sure that you are staying centered. You still have to make sure that you are still balanced, and you still have to make sure that you are adhering to your principles and your boundaries. because those principles and those boundaries are going to always be there. And if you don't adhere to them, then they're not really principles at all. So that's what I try to do, is to make sure that I still have that mental clarity, because it is a lot of mental, focus in order to help maintain yourself. Because you can be worn down physically. It's hot, because I'm in the South. Hell, some days it's like 100 degrees and I'm wearing gear, so there are a lot of things that are working not in my favor, and you're sweating, hell, you're ready to go, hell, you're hungry. Some days I don't get a break, but there's not an excuse, so I use this as a means to build discipline for myself and to learn more, hell, about myself, not just on the physical level, but on the mental, level too. Because once someone starts to get broken, hell, mentally, then that's when problems start to happen. And mind you, I've been broken, hell, mentally sometimes too, because there have been some times where I've snapped and, have done something that I possibly shouldn't have done, and said some things, but I learn from those things and I make sure that it doesn't happen, hell, again.
That's, you've brought up so many amazing points here. I just want to kind of highlight a few of them. And one is, highlighting that there's a mental process here, a mental and emotional process, and it's about how we are responding to or relating to things that are external to us, that trigger us, right? So, you have yourself, you're talking about wanting to stay in the center, which would be a place of calm observance, right? And to be aware of yourself as something or someone is affecting you from the external and impacting your emotion, right? And then your emotional response can make all the difference in what happens next. So you could escalate the situation or de-escalate the situation or neutralize the situation. And so there's a place of power there in that response. And that's related a lot to relationships with that which is outside of us. And then there's a need, there's skills required, right, to be able to succeed at that. One of those you mentioned was tolerating distress and discomfort. So being really hot, right? Or if we're hungry or we're tired, we're hot, we're cold, that's going to impact our capacity, right, to and how we respond and how we are able to keep our center under pressure or stress. And I think of that center as like a place of equanimity, a place of self energy, of calm, clear, centeredness. And then you said what I think was also really important to this conversation is about what is it that's going to guide our responses. So there's response or react, but then what is it that's going to guide that? And those are our principles and our boundaries. So the boundaries are partly defined by your role, right? As let's say, an umpire, and the position you're in there and the job you're there to do. But also there's a principle aspect that might, so to speak, trump that if it came down to it, right? Any thoughts to bounce off that?
Yes, integrity. Because the same things that I talk about in my own work, when I step on the field, I live by that, so integrity is one thing that I've always talked about, how being whole, being how honest, how having morals, just, how those three, how main principles. When I step out on that field, it's all hell about business, because I am there to provide a service and I want to do the best possible, job to provide the service. And I consider it too as a craft, so how umpiring is something that I take very seriously, because I want to get better at it, and it helps me as a man, it helps me as an individual learn more and more hell about myself. So having those principles and maintaining those maintaining those integrities are on the field and off the field, because to me, that is a way, life, and you shouldn't sacrifice that for anything. And I've worked with so many different umpires off the field, how to talk about it, or on the field, how to talk about it. But then you see them kind of contradict that and then sacrifice that. And what I always say is, once we sacrifice our integrity, once we sacrifice our word, and we don't honor our word, then that is a little piece of ourselves that we lose. That's going to be so much harder for us to find, because that little piece that is being lost, is not making us integral. It's not making us whole, because we have to be whole beings. We have to be whole, balanced beings, because, we have the masculine, we have the feminine, how some people call it the subconscious and how the conscious, or if you want to, call it how the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. How regardless of what you call it, is we have to have this wholeness. And if it is just how one sided it is, if it is imbalanced, then it's not going to work in your favor. And ultimately, it's going to do a disservice to not only you, but into seeing how the bigger picture. So in that level of balance, I know if I maintain to those principles and maintain to those boundaries, then ultimately that's not only going to keep me safe and staying out of trouble, but in the long haul, what I've learned, I'm staying true to myself and not sacrificing anything for anyone else. Because at the end of the day, it's not only about serving truth, but it's about staying true to yourself.
Yeah, great point. Derek,
Yeah.
any comments?
Yeah, totally. And yeah, I love how you broke that down, and staying true to yourself, and like seeing things just, if everything is energy, and like building your constitution. What is your, energetic signature, and how are you maintaining that, and what are you magnetizing in your life or repelling in regards to like the law of attraction and all this? And as the great Manly P. Hall has said many times, of just like, yes, when you're not staying true to your word and lying, and and it comes from within, it's all about one state of mind, like where did those ideas come from? Why did someone try to not be honest and truthful about whatever? They're going to be kind of depreciating their like magnetic, energetic integrity in a sense.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that what we do, even on the baseball field, so to speak, is it has a power that maybe we underestimate in terms of the magnetism or the impact on the environment, right? And what we attract or what we repel. And we could be attracting a fight, we could be attracting chaos, or we could be attracting, focus from, our behavior could impact everyone on the team, right?
Yes.
So that brings us to
true.
the question of like, what is the value of this topic? We're talking about the internal divide. Why is this so important?
Well, how this is important because we're talking about how the self, we're talking about how the individual. And when I say the self, I'm talking about how the physical, how the mental, the spiritual, the psychological, and how the emotional, not just, how the physical self as what we see. But if we really want to heal things and we really truly want to get in touch with ourselves, then we have to embrace all aspects of how the self. And just like I mentioned earlier, if we are divided within ourselves, that is not being in a state of wholeness. That is not having any form of integrity. So it's important because we have to find ourselves. We have to understand that we are more than just the physical. We have to understand that we are just more than just whatever forms of egoic attachments. We have to understand that we are just more than whatever roles that we play. So by finding your true self, then you can start to find your true purpose. That's what starts to give you the internal fulfillment. And that's why a lot of people in today's day are walking around in kind of like this slumber mindset, because they haven't found themselves. They're still divided. They're they don't have any true purpose because they haven't found it. So in that form of true purpose, that's what gives you meaning. And we all know meaning is what grants clarity. And we are all looking for forms of clarity. But if you are looking externally, you're never really going to find it. You have to look within yourselves, because there's so much on that internal journey that you can learn. And it's constantly going to be more information that's going to be going. It's like this journey is almost like it's going to take your whole life, because there's always new things that you're going to be learning about yourself. There's always new things that you can be healed. So in understanding that, then you start to realize that you have the internal power. The power comes from within. And this kind of gets on the video that Leslie did for the summit with Corey, and how people think that that power or, change comes from the external. and I forgot the correct term that you use, but then you also have the people who, who know that that change, that power, that willpower, that energy comes from the internal, because we are all a part of source. So, you have to go within your own source to tap
Yeah.
into that source, to tap into that energy.
Yeah. The locus of control.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that video, by the way. I
Oh, thank
loved it.
you. Cool. Derek, you want to talk a little about why this is so important to talk about the internal divide?
Yeah, sure. So, me and growing up myself, I had temper tantrums and all this stuff. I felt knee jerky about certain things. I also felt like I didn't have much of a voice just because I didn't know a whole lot about what's going on in reality and within myself. Even though I tried to stay neutral in a lot of stuff, and I didn't fall for like so much indoctrination and especially like bleeding heart statism of whatever flavor or color, But I just I don't know. I didn't feel like I was a true authentic person. I felt like there was something that just like I was in some kind of husk or some kind of crusty container. I had to like shatter it somehow in some way. And yeah, so like the internal conflicts, we always, I mean, what do people think? It's not such a dualistic thing as well. And in our first chat, Leslie, we talked about the whole, the congruency of our thoughts, emotions, and actions. If our thoughts are not, are still kind of jumbled, and we're not getting our mind straight, our, emotions could be entangled in those, untrue or faulty thoughts. And then our actions, what is that going to lead to? And especially Brandon could speak volumes on this because he did several, discussions and presentations about behavioralism and things of that nature. And yeah.
I really think that thoughts, emotions, actions being in alignment is really key to this conversation, because that is an internal a state, an internal state. And it brings up this concept of cognitive dissonance, which describes when we have competing or contradictory internal thoughts or beliefs. And then oftentimes people will live in ignorance of that and it, just sort of gloss over and not face that. And that ultimately leads to an interference in the achievement of our actual goals, right? So I think why this topic, one of the reasons this topic is important is because everyone is striving to, for some level of happiness, for some completion of goal. There's a manifestation aspect here, both in our individual lives and then for our world as a whole. And when we're divided within, we create blockades and self-sabotage, and we get stuck and we spin our wheels. And I know that every one of us has an area of our life where we've had a hard time breaking through and like really becoming all that we can be, so to speak, whether it's figuring out money or stopping a bad habit. And what happens psychologically is that to cope with stressors and traumas throughout our life, we become compartmentalized inside of ourselves, inside of our own minds. And when we have a goal, there can be some inner saboteurs that pop up that were originated from some kind of a trauma. And that saboteur, whether it's an anxiety or a self-doubt, came from an effort for our own psyche to protect ourselves from like a perceived threat or pain. And it says, oh, hold on there. That's dangerous territory. Don't go there. And then we end up turning left when we really want to go right. And so if we're not doing the inner work and we're not really aware of our own inner contradictions and the ways that we are self-sabotaging, the way that we are getting triggered and allowing ourselves to like act out, and cause chaos, then we're going to be stuck in our own progress. And when we look at the whole like correspondence to what, our effort to have peace and freedom in society, like if we have a bunch of people that are just reactive emotionally and not self-aware and self-sabotaging and all this, we're not going to make progress together in the direction that we really want and need to go.
Right. Right. And to kind of touch upon how what you was talking about cognitive dissonance, I always use this example of if people are familiar with how energy works, and you have two different forms of energy. These energies can't harmonize if they are on two different wavelengths. If they are on two different patterns, they're actually hell repel. So I always equate like cognitive dissonance is, imagine your thoughts are a form of energy, because technically how they are have forms of energy. But if you have two contradictory thoughts existing on the same plane, they are just going to repel. And when they repel, they go further and further hell away from each other. And that's what leads people to polar hell extremes. So if this is happening on an individual plane, how can we ever, harmonize with anybody else and create balance and create any form of a society based in freedom if we can't, learn to have balance and, live internally? It's never going to happen by law, because you're violating, how some of the core how laws of how this reality, and it's ignorance to the correspondence, how principle. If it's happening on the internal, it's going to happen on the external. If it's manifesting on the external, then it's coming from the internal, and that's what we see.
Yeah, there's also this. So we're talking about polarity, the principle also of polarity, and how people tend to ping pong, a ricochet, like from one extreme to the other. And that part of this dissolving the divide is finding the synthesis in this dialectic. And also recognizing that in some aspects of our life, there is contradiction, and both can be true, right? So if you look at the idea, let's say, of hot and cold, hot being on one end and cold on the other, it's all one continuum. It's all one quality of temperature, but I could be cold and you could be hot, and both are true, right? So let's talk a little bit about how within ourselves, how do we negotiate contradictions and things that can exist simultaneously? How do we dissolve or find centeredness between poles?
Oh man, hell, you got to find a way to silence that mind chatter. Hell, that's what a lot of people struggle with, because we live in an age where there is technology. There's all this information that's coming at us. It's just one big, hell cluster. Fuck in a lot of people's mind, because there's so much hell information that's coming in. We got to be able to, sit down, take some deep breaths and kind of slow things down, because as long as our mindsets are, being bombarded with all this information, you can't consciously, keyword consciously, help process it. And this is one of the things that I learned from Lennon Honor. In his earlier works, he talked about sensory overload. It's taking in so much information that it overstimulates your senses. It overstimulates how your nervous system. Then that information is transferred up to the brain, and sadly, it's not really processed in the higher realms of the neocortex, because it is overstimulation, and then overstimulating those nerves can be harmful. So in this oversensation or this overstimulation, we are actually going to an extreme, and that's what we see is people taking in so much information, have so much information, it either push them in a state of fear, or how people taking in so much information, it triggers some form of emotional reaction, and then therefore it's not a response. So learning how to silence, quiet, how the mind in forms of meditation, going out in nature, even just reading books, something that is very archaic in today's day and age, being able to silence the mind and being able to process information at a conscious level, and not just being so stuck in, this hamster wheel, being able to slow down things and process that information the way it should be. And mind you, it's not going to happen overnight, because it's going to take time. It's going to take time to consciously, truly understand something. So be willing and be understandable that it is a process. It's not going to happen overnight, and you have to understand that, and be patient too. That if you do that, if you do do this, when you come out on the other side, it's going to be so much more beneficial for you. And that's why I've always like, small forms of meditation, how just being able to kind of silence that mind chatter and being able to really hear that inner voice, that true inner dialogue. And it's not, how that dialogue that's being bombarded by, Facebook ads or, hell, for Amazon ads, but it's that chatter right there, or chatter from social media, chatter by friends, or chatter from, hell, parental programming. It's being able to silence and quiet that mind chatter. Because when you do that, that is actually what starts to build up your corpus callosum within the mind. And the corpus callosum is the part that relates health information to the left and right hemisphere of the brain. And that's why health meditation had always been one of those health processes that actually help balance that mind chatter. So yeah, being able to slow down how that mind chatter is one of the key things that people have to do. Because if the mind is always running, then the physical body is going to always, help forget the hamster wheel. Because if it's happening on the internal, then that mind is going to lead, or how those thoughts are going to lead to an emotional reaction, and then that reaction is going to lead to a physical reaction. So yeah, being able to silence the mind and slow things down to be able to process health information, and to take in information too. And that's what a lot of people can't really do is they don't know how to take in right information, because that mind chatter is just, constantly running. It's constantly, like at play.
Or thoughts that like put on the brakes, right? That create resistance, that altogether to be open to information. Yeah, a lot of good points. Derek?
Yeah, and there's a lot of information that people just don't want to necessarily look into, because already off the bat, they'll judge a book by its cover and like, oh, that contradicts my, what I already think I know and believe and all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, like, yeah, recentering, meditation, being on the median. What is your medium of that way? I mean, it's not just being in a lotus position with your hands like this. Like, that's just like such a new age image of what meditation is. I mean, you could just be in a meditative mind state doing anything, going on a walk or doing whatever, but in being able to like have that alone quiet time, try to clear the clutter out of your mind and silence that mind chatter, like you said, Brandon. And yeah, yeah, even like deep contemplation and being able to, all right, stand in the center. You understand, whatever idea, even, ideas about yourself. There's that one extreme and that other extreme, the two polarities, right? What is that unity? What is the actual isness of that? Like the wholeness of it, like you said, like being holistic about it and being in in touch with your intuition. And yeah, just having that, yeah, thoughts, emotions, and actions, the three tiers of the brain, neocortex, like, and the limbic, and then the R complex, all, kind of corresponding to the thoughts, emotions, and actions. And like you said, there's also, you look at down below on the vertical scale, the left and right hemispheres, the masculine and feminine archetypal forms of, that, yeah, just having those balanced, especially connected to the core intelligent mind of your soul, which is in the center of your chest.
Yeah. And the heart.
Really just don't even are connected to it as well, or even look into. And if people don't love themselves, then their mind chatter and their inner dialogue isn't necessarily, all that legit. And yeah, there's still things that need to be reconciled, and ways to be going about that is to get into hermit mode, like I have the image on the top right. And yeah, being able to silence the mind and cutting off all external influences sometimes, and just being able to take that journey within and, delve down deep and do that shadow work, that inner work. And even going back to, the childhood memories or traumas and this and that, and like understanding why today there's certain behaviors and thought patterns that I still carry that haven't matured since I was a child, and that kind of stuff. So
yeah, that self-awareness. I really, I'm thinking about that part of our task is to master our energy machine, basically, and to tune in and attune to ourselves and to recognize how our brain works. And the model of like the triune brain is really helpful, that, the frontal lobes, the right and left hemispheres, the thinking, the human brain that allows us to do this complex thought, that in how it can connect and relate to the limbic system, our emotional brain, and then our reptile brain, the brainstem, which is, activating all the physiological responses of fight and flight or freeze. And so when we are in fight or flight, typically, the frontal lobe shut down and we don't have access to the thinking part of our brain. So what Brennan's talking about in terms of meditation is really key. Some form of mindfulness or meditation practice that you do regularly so that you can take this awareness and this self-attunement with you wherever you go. So if you're umpiring on the field, you have that awareness still with you of sort of your mind, your gut, and your heart sort of in alignment, and you're able to scan in like super, super rapidly to see where you stand in response to the environmental stimuli, right? And so when you catch yourself, if you're really tuning in, you catch yourself having that spark of emotion or reactivity, and you can ground yourself usually with your breath, right? If we're talking about skills and how do we bring ourselves back to center, the breath is really a key anchor in that, and the awareness of your body. We're not beings of where our heads are cut off. We have a body, and the signals of what's going on mentally are really displayed in our body. So there's like a simultaneous awareness of within and outside of ourselves. And I think that there's also an aspect here of bringing the automatic conscious, where a lot of times these things are happening in split seconds before we realize it. The more that we're doing that meditative, mindful practices where we're becoming aware of our own bodies and how our bodies respond to stress and so forth, then we become conscious of that dynamic. And it's the consciousness of it which allows us to make proper decision, under moments of duress or whatever.
Are those psychosomatics, by the way? Or something along those lines?
Psychosomatics is kind of a word that doesn't entirely, it's not really useful. I don't know. I don't find it super useful. It's like somatic, meaning that it's physical, but it's everything in our body is connected to our mind. It's not like separation. It doesn't really exist. But yeah, you call it psychosomatic. So that was important. And then the other thing I wanted to say was our thoughts, and our attachment to outcomes. We get very attached to something being a certain way. And sometimes whether it's like a sports team, people get really attached. And I think it's like, it's a symbol of something. It represents something. So, people will be like hurting other people because their team loses or because the umpire or referee makes a bad call, And so that's super important that we're all aware of our thoughts about the thing and the people and the outcomes we're relating with.
Yeah. As Leslie was saying that, how my mind was just going through thousands of times that's happened, to me. But one thing that you had brought up was the breath. And one of the modalities that I've been practicing for like 8-something years was conscious breathing. And what people don't realize is once you start to hold your breath, pretty much the body starts to go through a pretty a certain way of doing things as far as fight and flight. And I want to say this is something that a bad habit that we developed as we were young. Because when you cry, I was told that how you start to hold your breath because you can't cry pretty much at the same time. And if you ever heard a baby crying, you hear them crying, and then there's that pause, and then they take that breath. So conscious breathing is something that is very important because how the breath is pretty much going to help determine how your mindset too. And if you can control how your breath, how you can control your attitude, and you can control how you respond to people and to the health environment. So in practicing, how conscious breathing, I've, how taught myself to, stay balanced. And even though something is happening on the external plane, once I, have become conscious that my breath changes, then I know that I'm going to react to something. And this is something that I've tested too, because I've tested this stuff how many times over the years. But I've actually realized that once my breath starts to change, then I know, like, hey, Brandon, you're starting to lose control, help yourself, find that center, find that balance. Then therefore I can go through my breathing techniques, because there are actually breathing techniques that I practice to kind of refocus, to kind of center myself. So yeah, I'm glad how that you brought that conscious breathing up. And and how conscious breathing is something that can be practiced at any times hell during the day. You can do it hell anywhere. And it's something so simple. How you do it how multiple times, and through repetition, how it starts to become how natural.
Yeah, yeah, very true. I think it's an
Yeah.
important practice for everybody. Go ahead, Derek.
Oh yeah, just what you said about crying and breathing reminded me of like my awakening experience, if you will, and that kind of felt like I got zapped by the universe or whatever. It can be relatable like Kundalini, but what what I was doing, I was like had my cosmic repentance, if you will, and I was weeping for a good like 20 minutes. But as I was weeping, like, and it was intensifying so much that I was hyperventilating for like 10 minutes straight, and it just couldn't stop. And like, my chakras were lit up, my crown was just exploding. It was crazy, and I've just been on a different frequency ever since. And it was just me cramming to understand so much of what I don't, and making that like sweet surrender to it all, in a sense, if you will. And yeah, just yearning to want to know more and connect to my higher self more, and like retrieve my soul essence on a multidimensional level, or whatever. It's not all mystic woo-woo stuff. It's just, I feel like there's just so much more to what we have within ourselves. And what about the whole fact that that was a driving factor of why I had a fire lit up my ass, is like, what's the deal with this rip-off of life, that we have this junk DNA, and like we're supposedly just operating off of like 10% of the functionality, true potential of our brain, or something like that. So yeah, that's like an inner conflict in and of itself, just by, and it's not by design, it's by like some distortion, it seems. So yeah. And I've put out so many music mixes that talk about the mind. My moniker is Awakening Mind for that reason, of the first cosmic law principle. And I've had a lot of mixes that emphasize just like thoughts and all these things, and taking into consideration that not all your thoughts are your own. And there's things like Watiko and things like that. And thought also means Thoth, if you want to take it back to Hermes or whatever, so yeah. But he ain't the bee's knees anyways. He's been exposed. But anyways, don't let thought betray true, proper knowledge and wisdom.
Yeah, you're bringing up this energetic point again, and how we're all connected, and our energetic fields overlap and can be influenced. So, this symbology, and other mind control techniques, sound, all are weaponry, or can be used as weaponry against our energetic bodies, and we can carry thoughts that really didn't originate within us, but originated outside of us. So part of this process of dissolving the divine within us is recognizing what's my thought and what is not my thought. What is the external impact on my physiology and on the potential of my own brain and my functioning, right? Why aren't we maximizing this potential of our brain? I've been talking recently with several of friends around this idea that, indigenous people had this incredible like extrasensory perception where they could actually communicate, like the Aborigines could communicate to other tribesmen across great distances that they found water, for example. Or in Native American, a story I heard this morning was that that the coyotes spoke to this Native American man as to that the buffalo were like on the other side of this ridge. Kathy O'Brien talks about how she and her daughter, under these states of trauma and duress, would communicate telepathically, right? So when there's these capacities that we have as humans that we're not even touching upon, that is getting shut down, I think, by all these influences in the world. And so, wow, what is our potential? And maybe we want to be more curious about that. And curious about the world and other people, so that we can really know ourselves as well as we can, as completely as we can, and maximize our potential.
Right. Having that curiosity, and having that curiosity comes out of that divine feminine, because having that curiosity means, hey, I'm wondering if this, can be created. So we have to have that, because if we don't have that, then we lose a part of ourselves, because we'll never really be willing to dive into the unknown. We'll never really be willing to get out of our comfort zone. And that's what we see, is so many people just want to stay in that comfort zone. They don't have that curiosity. They don't want to be creative. And also too, I would say, once you start to be creative, then you start to figure out what your true purpose is, what your true meaning is. And that's what's going to give you that inspiration. And then in that creativity, you can inspire other people. So in doing, what we are talking about, and finding yourself, or going within yourself, there's so much that can be gained, not just from a physical level, but in the all realms, in the aspect of the self. Because it was once I started to be creative, then that emotional, heart-based intelligence, not just care and compassion, but all of those traits started to be developed, and I started to feel more purpose, more wholeness, within my being. So we've got to have that curiosity and understanding. Yes, you're going to, yes, you're going to make. How you're going to make mistakes, you're going to get things wrong. There may be even times where you may follow the wrong person, but still have that compassion for yourself and be willing to forgive yourself, to say, hey, it was a mistake. No one's perfect. And don't be so hard, on yourself, to where you're beating yourself up, to where you're doing more harm and doing more damage. Just be willing to have that compassion and that forgiveness for yourself. Because if you don't have that compassion and care for yourself, then how can you give that compassion and care to anyone else outside of yourself?
Yeah. You want to say anything on that, Derek?
Yeah, sure. And it reminded me, we had a wonderful talk with the One Great Work Warriors, with Chris Jansen, Jimmy, and Crip Rick, about the masculine and all this stuff. And it just came to mind because you mentioned that emotional intelligence, and a lot of what we talked about the other week in that discussion is just like a lot of men, especially in the older generations, they just lack that, and it's hard for them to even like get in touch with that as well, and like how to even navigate in all these things. And that's just like one of those internal conflicts or divides in and of itself within a lot of people, unfortunately, that they're not in touch with their emotions, so they're not fully controlled, obviously. So it's just a lot of projections come after that, and voila, we got like so many negative feedback loops stemming from all this stuff, unfortunately. So
that emotional intelligence, I think, is really what we're talking about here, is developing that, which involves the balanced brain and the activation and presence of both left and right hemisphere intelligence, and that masculine and feminine aspects of ourself, which we all have within us. And where we can get imbalanced on one extreme or the other. And when you're in one extreme, you're missing a whole perspective that's taking you away from truth, the integration of truth anyway. And so being aware of how do we develop many of us are underdeveloped in some of the feminine skills of like intuition and creative expression, because the left brain is so activated by this world of technology and to-do lists and achievement and get things done. So how do we balance that is through the aspects of slowing down time, right? Getting off the to-do list, off the linear thinking, into a place where we can access the intuition. And I do think that things like meditation and time in nature, and possibly like using some plant medicines. There are things we need to do deliberately and consciously to balance our brain. And I think maybe talking a little bit more about, well, what are those skills and activities and things that we can do consciously to really, and we've talked about some already, but let's just, expand that a little bit. What are our responsibilities as individuals to do to like sharpen our tool, to master our energy machine, and be a whole human being?
Taking some time out for yourself. And this is something that I've had to learn, from some feminine, female friends is taking that time for yourself, putting that time held aside and creating something, taking something or doing something that truly brings you happiness, or just getting away from the technology. Because this is something that I did for years is just sitting in a room, sitting in a chair. Hey, if you want to sit in front of the mirror, how that works too, but just being more comfortable in looking at yourself, being more comfortable inside your own skin. A lot of people, have problems with that. If you were to put them in a room in front of a mirror and sit them in front of a chair, they wouldn't even last 5 minutes, because hell, number one, they aren't comfortable with how they look, and they know that there's something inside of them that's bringing them disharmony. So we've got to learn to be comfortable in our own being, because these are our vessels. If you're not comfortable in your own being, how are you going to be comfortable, hell, being in hell, another place, hell, another situation, hell, with someone else? So you've got to take time to help reward yourself. And this is something that we weren't really taught, how growing up, is rewarding yourself. And I'm not talking about just, like a physical reward, which, at times, how that's fine, but a spiritual reward, how psychological, how reward, learning more, hell, about yourself, hell, learning what drives you, hell, learning what turns you on, how that's something, how that you need to know too. And then too, hell, learning what your weaknesses are. If there is something, hell, that you find that is inadequate, something that you are not comfortable with, then sitting in that chair, sitting in front of that mirror, that's your time to be honest. That's your time to learn more, hell, about yourself. This is something that I did for years and years and years, and just sitting back, hell, I would close my eyes and just take in, hell, the information, through other forms of sensation and not just what I see. Because a lot of people are just so focused on what's in front of them that they lose sight of the other forms of senses, because we can take in, hell, information from a wide variety of senses, and not just, hell, the five. You have the intuitive sense too. But just sitting in that chair and having that inner dialogue, and just listen, because that voice is always there. It's going to always be there. And then once you start to take in that voice, you reward yourself by listening to that voice. And then if there is something that you don't like, then that's something that can be worked on. And that's something that I practice too. If there was something, hell, about myself, of course it was my speech, because speech is something that I've always struggled with. It's just something that hell, I was born with. Hell, I was born with some speech impediments. Most people don't hear them, but trust me, I'm consciously, hell, aware of them. So what I would do, and this is something that I learned in umpire, is I would sit in front of the mirror and I would just talk. And then hell, something that I also would do is me and my cousin, hell, we would kind of practice, and I would just turn hell my camera on, and I just got more comfortable being in front of this camera, being in front hell of the screen. And after like 2 years, you start to build that confidence. So it's being honest and being conscious, aware. There is something about each of our beings that we don't like. Well, if you don't like it, I'm not saying go out, and like get plastic surgery, but like get to the causal factor, figure out why. And if you are capable of changing it, which how you should be able to, then change it. And that's how you can reward yourself. Because I've always looked at it like this: if there is a weakness that I am aware of, with myself, then that is a way that I can be exploited by somebody else.
Yes.
And that's why I've always said is we have to understand these tools of mind control. We have to understand how the psychology works. We have to understand how our psychology works. Because once you understand that, and once you have that knowledge, then that puts you in that position of power to create change. Not just change within yourselves, but you can understand how other people's psychology works if they are ignorant to it. And then when it comes to, trying to help spread this information and help this knowledge, you have the tools, you have that armor to fight this battle, because you can read that body language. You can see how they will react to certain forms of information. You can see the emotional, reaction too. Then hey, if I need to pull back, or maybe I can be a little bit more forceful. So it's not mind influence. I'm sorry, it's not mind control. It's mind influence, because that's what we are trying to do. Is we are not trying to change people. We're trying to influence them to take this information in and to create change within themselves. Two completely different things, because you can't change anybody else, but you can influence them to do the work on themselves and take this information in and look within that mirror to create change within themselves and heal that division, heal that internal schism, heal that, heal that cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, it's like releasing the clasp or the, that clawing desire to force or make someone do something, right? And backing off to that place of center and think about, how do I inspire, influence, magnetize, the environment or other people.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Because people will feed off of that.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, my YouTube channel, one of the first things I wrote down as far as like what it was about is motivating minds through music. I'm not trying to control people or tell people what to do. It's just, having some kind of influence and doing on different frequencies, melodics, lyrics. I thought that was a really cool medium of expression. And I just kind of rolled with it because I didn't have a smooth enough voice to be, speaking in the way that Brandon does, which I, when you first told me you had a speech issue, I was like, really? Wow, man. Because I had a little thing in middle school. I went to some speech correctional therapy or whatever, but, and then living in France really helped out with that as well. But, so it's interesting. I love what you had to say about everything, Brandon. Like, I totally feel you. And, but at the same time, I feel like there's a lot of people that feel like their shit doesn't stink. They don't need to change for anything. Like people are victims of easy lifestyles and complacency. And even if, they just get to have a partner and have sex with them and consume food and just be in a comfortable, daily routine, that's good enough for them, unfortunately. And I'm not saying that's the worst thing. I'm not speaking bad about that. But I'm just saying, like, there's those routines that get, that become negative feedback loops because, it doesn't allocate a whole lot of time for them to, do some self reflection, introspection, like you're saying. And with all the media and stuff, it's like people would much rather go and do that stuff because it's entertaining. And the word entertaining is to enter the mind and hold it. And we wonder who's holding it, actually, right? So, and then yeah, those who are holding people's attentions and minds, it's just created so many things throughout society. Brandon, I wanted you to kind of touch on this or ask the question of as far as like, because people have these internal conflicts on as far as like what the external world and society kind of expects people to be or whatever, and go through the main stages of life, this American dream stuff, get the good education, get the trophy wife, play the sports, watch the sports or whatever, get the fancy car in the house after you get the big career job and all this stuff, and you got the atomic family with your dog and the white picket fence and all that stuff, even though that's kind of outdated at this point, but there's like these expectations that people have, and like you said, they beat themselves up because they can't achieve these things that are pretty unrealistic anyways. And it's just like these shit stems of the matrix that, are not really something that to be, valued that high of an achievement in living that lifestyle anyways,
Yes, and I can, talk hell about this because the way that I grew up is hell. I was in an environment in a low income area, and then fortunately, my parents moved us to an environment that was like hell middle class. And me as a kid, I didn't really quite understand it, but now that I look back on it, hell, it was a 3-story house, hell, gated community. We had a pool in the subdivision, and we had a basketball court in our backyard. So everybody would come over and play basketball. But it was just this illusion because hell, my dad was stuck into this hell illusion. Like it's like he was loving it, like he wanted to be the talk for another town. But there was all these internal problems because once you have all those big things, you have the house, you got to pay money to maintain it. You got to pay someone to help cut the yard. It's almost like hell. I'm going to paraphrase the Buddhist quote in one of the books, but it's pretty much saying like the more material have possessions you have, then the more time, the more money you have to pay to maintain those things. Because if people aren't for hell, if people aren't hell aware, everything in hell, everything in manifestation starts to break down. Hell, entropy is always hell for at play. Hell, there's gonna be dust that builds up. I'm constantly trying to dust down, have my computer because things are constantly breaking down into forms of chaos. So the more things that you have, you're going to have to maintain, and to maintain those possessions is going to take time and it's going to take money. And the time, the money, and the focus is going to pull your awareness, going to pull your health consciousness away from the things that you should be focused on. So they give us these glamorous things, these shiny things, because of course, children like shiny things, how animals like shiny things. It's what's going to be attractive to an individual who is in that low form of vibration. So then you try to grasp these shiny things. Then once you get a hold of something, you don't want to let it go. And then that's what starts to feed that egoic hell attachment, is once you have those things, you don't want to let go because you're like, hey, this is mine. I worked hard for it. Then therefore you almost kind of have that child mentality. This is mine. This is mine. This is mine, right. Yep. And you don't want to let go. And then anyone who brings hell information, saying, hey, maybe you should let this go, how do you react? You will use forms of slander, you will use forms of verbal, and even get physical, because you have built up that egoic hell attachment. And that's why they tell us, hey, you got to have this big house, hey, you got to have, this Tesla, or how this Mercedes, hey, you got to have, 3 kids, and work this 9-to-5 slave job, because they are putting out forms of wrong information. And we all know that forms of wrong information is going to lead to wrong forms of behavior. And that's what we see, is everyone's trying to lash out for this dream, but they're never really going to catch it. And the ones who do, if you talk to them, they are actually in a bad mindset because they are suffering.
Yes, and afraid of losing that comfort, like you said, so invested in losing what they've gained, or maybe having money now and having the opportunity to like do a lot of pleasurable things, travel and, take cruises and do this and that. And I think it's like the trick, again, it's like putting people in this divide, this dialectic of polarity, playing with our desire to have a balance. But so you work really hard, you're very goal driven, very masculine, then you have this time off or this money, and then you get to do the feminine in extreme. And I think a lot of the material, those little carrots that we're chasing, it's almost like the fake feminine that we seek, the false feminine. It's shiny, these shiny things. Like, and the feminine is, is kind of like beauty and comfort and, being able to luxuriate on some level. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's like, what is the true natural feminine way of being, right? And they're tricking us with these other shiny objects that we're going after in a way. I just had that thought. But I was thinking about, the pain point and how people get kind of trapped. And like you were saying, Brandon, that the material world, what would you say? Like, it breaks down. Yeah, and so do our bodies. Our bodies break down. And it leads to a pretty difficult, like, internal dissonance or internal discomfort around our bodies and pain. And what is a great motivator but our pain, whether it's emotional or physical? And so I think that is an inroad for people, everyone has a pain point. And that is where, even when they're attempting to find happiness through all these material things and food and comfort and being safe on their couch, with their popcorn, watching TV or whatever, there's ultimately going to be a pain that results. Many people are experiencing disease and physical pain. And so wherever anyone is at, it's like looking to that place where you're trying really hard to be okay and feel okay, but it's just not working, And people tend to, keep trying over and over and over again, knocking on the same door, and it just doesn't work, right? We have to wake up and say, wait a minute, this isn't working. Let's go within and let's figure out why I'm experiencing this pain. Why as humanity are we experiencing this pain? And gain wisdom, different knowledge and understanding to be more wise in our choices. And I do think that the body work part of building this feminine, the proper feminine, is embracing how our bodies work and listening to our body, developing a harmonious relationship with our body and the wisdom of nature expressed through it. And that has a lot to do with food and sleep and balance and breathing and grounding. So we can use our bodies as an inroad to balance our mind through scanning our body and noticing where the tension is, breathing into our body, into our pain, grounding ourselves through our senses. Like you said, Brandon, not only what you really see, but seeing everything around you in new ways, like it's brand new, and listening to the sounds and touching and really feeling like your feet on the ground where, right now, and what does that connection feel like? And the parts of your body touching the chair and noticing the temperature of the air and the textures, of things around you. We can gain our centeredness a lot through our connection to our human form in the material world, and then learning about how it operates and honoring it. There's a certain element here, I think, of honoring our impermanence, but also understanding we have amazing technology here that we can, if we treat it right, if we learn how we work, we have amazing potential. Imagine the guys who really are into cars and they know how everything works inside and outside of a car. Well, we all have the capacity to understand our own selves that way, so we can drive optimally, right?
Yes. Man, you said that so how beautifully. Like I'm just imagining, how this stuff in my mind, and yeah, how listening to the body, how this is something that how Corey Endrelett how talks about, how because all of our bodies are going to be different, but you have to have this conscious realization to listen to your body because your body has an intelligence of its own, and also too trauma can be stored held in certain parts held held of the body. So held listening to that, and that's something that I had to learn because held through repetition, held through held conscious realization, you can start to held know certain patterns held within the body, and it's like helping me. I know once the weekend comes, my body starts to react how differently because I'm preparing myself how not just mentally but physically that pretty much I'm going into a war zone for at work because I have to deal with certain things and during the week how my body how reacts certain how a certain way but once Friday comes even if I'm not working I am aware that my body still will go through how this certain way of doing things because how the body has its own how it has its own form of hell intelligence too. So through hell repetition, how my body has become hell accustomed because I've kind of been on the same pattern for 17 years and it will change up, but if I am working, I'm pretty much busy the whole weekend. So from 4:30 in the morning, sometimes up to midnight, I'm on my feet. So yeah, I know Derek's like, oh man, yeah, it's a lot of physical stress, but then too, that's how I've learned to build discipline. Help physically, to help kind of, help strengthen my legs, help strengthen, have my arms. But two, it's the mental discipline. So being hell aware and listening to the body and not hell ignoring it. Because if you ignore it, that's only going to make things worse. It's like, how people have said, if you ignore certain symptoms, then those symptoms are only going to get worse. So, hell, pay attention to that and then shine light on that. Hell, get that proper diagnosis because in having that knowledge, that's what puts you in a position of power. And you see, how people say how knowledge and ignorance are, are the opposites. How I would say knowledge and fear, because it's the people who are in fear, then they stay in ignorance. But once you have that knowledge, that's what dispels that fear.
Yeah, yeah.
Gnosis, diagnosis, the way to knowledge. And diet is just a way of life. And how are people's diets really? And how do people really understand the gut-brain connection? It's like 70%. And what are they actually consuming? The contradictions within that. And hey, I mean, I try to eat healthy and I'm like pretty much like vegan, even though I don't like the word, whatever. But I still can eat like, some potato chips, whatever, or, have a beer sometimes. But it's all about, stacking up all the negatives and the minuses and also understanding like mucus forming foods or acidic foods versus alkaline or just healthy foods and like all that stuff. It's, listen to your body as we're all saying and, find that what works for you and what you should be consuming in more moderation and understanding like everything that you consume is the totality of your being. So, when everything is considered, how are you looking yourself in the mirror? Like that's it's a good way to, but how many things are people considering? And there's so much to consider. And it's just a shame that, we weren't really taught either from family or school or educate, whatever, growing up of how to do this, how to properly learn what's a good way to have that teachability, how to properly think, how to cultivate good thoughts. And reminds me of a video I did. It's called, planting proper seeds in your alchemical garden or something like that. And, like just like, how are you tending to the fires within, but also, your mental landscape and is it properly watered? Is it, you got the winds of chaos blowing around too much? Are you able to have a nice subtle thing? And like, even like, you're thinking about things and you're trying to understand why you're triggered by certain things or why certain emotions arise from whatever. And are you able to kind of step aside from that in that neutral position and be the objective observer that allows you to suspend all your, emotional hangups and mental hangups as well regarding, certain things about anything, yourself, other people, life, government, whatever.
Yeah. There's not a true divide between our minds and our bodies, right? They're very interconnected and all one, even though there's an appearance of separateness. Again, but we have an integrated system, and so attending to all aspects of mind and body and spirit is really important for the optimal functioning of our awareness and our consciousness, right? To be able to read the environment and process information and come to conclusions that then lead to our actions in the world. So we want to have a pure, I think of it as like a clean machine, right? And our food and diet have a lot to do with that. And we're all individual too, in that, my optimal diet may be different than yours. And the answer isn't going to come from some, nutrition guru or MD. Really, it's about that inner knowledge and learning about our own systems. So I really want to promote people so much more to recognize that you can become your own expert of yourself and know what you need. You don't have to make an appointment necessarily and go ask somebody who's got a very limited amount of training and knowledge and have restrictions from government licensing boards to tell them what they can and can't tell you, So part of this empowerment and dissolving the divide, part of dissolving the divide is our empowerment through self-knowledge.
Yes, this whole one shoe fits all, health propaganda that a lot of the health mainstream, health governmental institutions, spew out. If one shoe fits all, then that kind of takes away, the whole point of being an individual. It takes away, how all of those aspects of each and every one of us. So to me, it's just another form of health collectivism and, throwing everybody into the same pot. What works for me may not work for you. So you kind of have to, you have to use discernment. You have to experiment. And that's what we are trying to, help encourage people to do is you have to experiment, with yourself, experiment, with these things. Hell, meditation may not work for you, hell, my diet may not work for you. Okay, well, hell, listen to your body, hell, listen to, have the inner dialogue, and then you have to make that discernment. You have to make that choice. Don't rely on anybody else. Listen to that heart-based, health intelligence, and then that right there should be that guiding factor. If your body is telling you one thing, then don't ignore it. You need to listen to it, and you have to experiment. It's going to take time, and a lot of people who want that instant gratification, how they want her results now, it's like, no, it's not going to happen, because if your body is telling you something now, then yeah, but usually if that's happening, then it's not going to be going in a positive way, because if you are living a form of toxicity, you still have to understand that once you change something that the body has become held accustomed to for so long, there's always going to be negative consequences for that, because you have to pretty much weed out that toxicity. It's just like, hell, if someone is trying to reprogram, themselves, you have to get rid of them, of the bad forms of thought, those bad forms of information, those neural pathways that have already, been paved. You got to deconstruct and break those neural pathways down in order for something to be built. You can't build on top of something that is toxic, because that toxicity is going to be that foundation. So then therefore that toxicity is not going to be able to coexist on something that is not toxic. So that's why what we're saying is you have to take away or break down what is already there. And it kind of gets into what I said earlier about energy. If that toxicity is on one plane, and then you try to bring in new form of information that is not toxic, that is another form of energy, they're not going to coexist. So you have to take away and break down those boundaries that are negative, that information, those thought forms, those beliefs,
Yeah.
those patterns, those worldviews, because a lot of people have negative worldviews. Those negative ways you see yourself, those negative ways are those negative, things you're putting into your body. You got to break all that down and be willing to let that go and just throw your hands up to the all, the isness, help the universe and say, I am in service to you. Sometimes that's what you got to do is just throw your hands up, hell to the heavens, even if you are religious or not, it's still the heavens, hell the all, hell the isness, hell source, and just throw your hands up and just say, like, hey, I am in service to you. And then hell, once you do that, then hell, the information should be coming. Hell, the energy should be coming. So yeah, you got to learn
Really
Yeah,
to
man.
let
Real
shit go
quick,
sometimes.
I just got to say something real quick because, detoxification. We can do this in so many different ways, and yeah, digital detox is great, especially to kind of untangle like this hardwired brain that's so addicted to all this, dopamine hits of screen time and this and that, and to rebuild one's foundation. I mean, like everything you said, like the totality, it's like just clear that that gunk so you can establish something on some solid ground is like something like a vision quest where you're out in nature. You ain't got no tech. It's a digital detox as well as like a food detox, and all you're doing is drinking water, and you're out in nature, and you pitch a tent, and there you go. Good luck. You get your little hatchet like that one guy in the movie, or no, that TV show, not TV show. I know the guy's name too. But it's the book. Yeah. But anyways, hatchet. You know that one? But yeah, just for me, I've done so many. I've detoxed and not or fasted. Master Lemon Cleanse, by the way, for over 100 days in my entire life. And that has helped me
Nice.
practice so much in so many different types of discipline and mental, physical, and all these things. And Leslie, I liked what you mentioned as far as like bringing up pain, because pain is it's one of the biggest catalysts that a lot of people are, yeah, the biggest and probably the most common for people to actually, it kind of like crashes their paradigm and they really have to make a change. Otherwise, they're doomed in a sense. And it's unfortunate that they couldn't change before leading up to that point, and it got that bad almost, And so like having discussions like this and like things that we've learned over the years, it's like, yeah, we're trying to avoid that for ourselves and other people as well. And like we see the collective trajectory, and it's kind of like we're gonna go smack in a brick wall going how many miles per hour, but
Yeah. Yeah, that I love that idea of it's really important of detoxing and removing the obstacles and the stagnancy and the barriers, the toxicities in our bodies and in our minds, right? And to then from that place be in the place of stillness, to receive information, to listen internally as well as like spiritually, and from there rebuild very consciously. And Derek, you brought up this metaphor of like building a shelter, and I was thinking, yeah, it's like we then need to take responsibility for building our internal mechanisms to protect ourselves, to master, to develop the skills to be master of our own lives. And that could include an inner shelter. We have to have filters that we are conscious of putting up at times, like from overstimulation in the world. And habits, we create habits and routines very consciously instead of knee-jerk reactive to pain or discomfort, where we're just sort of like, flopping around according to external, stimulation. One of my kind of biggest wake up times was when I just realized that I was sort of just blowing in the wind. My life was going so fast that I had lost touch with my own self-driven trajectory, and I was just reacting. I was surviving, and I was reacting to the environment. And it took like having a baby, and having time off to realize, how the hell did I ended up with this baby? Like right when I'm trying to like end a relationship, and what happened to my dreams and my goals, and like what am I doing? And sometimes it takes that like our lives get out of control, and we're stuck like, how the hell did I get here? It reminds me of that Talking Heads song, where he says, how did I get here in this house with this beautiful wife? Like, I don't even know, right? Do we create our own lives? And that's often when we wake up, is when we realize, damn, I need to take some more control over this trajectory that I'm on and take responsibility for how I got here and develop both the internal and external boundaries, to like if I'm on a horse, I need to guide that horse. And, we need to take care of the horse and take care of ourselves and the carriage we're in, and, all of these metaphors along the way.
Right, because taking control means you have to be centered and have balance. Because if you wanted to build a house, and you wanted to pick up a hammer and start, putting in some nails, if your left hand and her right hand was in there fighting with each other, you wouldn't be able to get much done. So in order for us to take control, we have to build that inner control and build that inner balance, because that's where the true power lies. And if people aren't familiar, with my presentation that I did at the Freedom Under Natural Law 2 conference, I kind of talked about, the whole thoughts, emotions, and the actions, the mystery of the heart, mind, and hands, and how we need to have that balance. We need to have that internal balance, because we see so many people that are abusing, using these hands for the wrong, reasons, and they are using forms of violence. They're using forms of manipulation, and what they are constructing, what they are building, is a prison. And if you was to ask them, like, hey, do you want to be ruled by someone else? Hey, do you want to be controlled by someone else? They would say no. Hell no. I've actually asked this I've asked this to people, but then yet their hands, their deeds, their behaviors are doing the complete opposite of what they just said and what they think. So we've got to find a way to build that internal control, that internal balance, and feel comfortable with ourselves, and then to love ourselves. Hell, this was something that I had to admit to myself a few months ago. And shout out to Maria West, because when I was watching one of her videos, it just dawned on me, because she said something, to the effect like, you can't love someone else if you don't have love for yourself. And then, and then there was something that I told myself, possibly one of the first times that I remember. It's like, hey, I love myself. Hey, I feel comfortable. With myself. So just emitting those words created so much of your energy held inside me that it gave me that fulfillment. It gave me more of a purpose. So shout out to her.
Yeah, self-love really is a root, right?
Yeah.
That we need to have as a foundation to then be in integrity too. Like it comes back to integrity and alignment of thoughts, feelings, actions, mind, body, spirit. And when we're out of alignment, when we're filled with all this dissonance and internal contradiction, then generally we're not going to feel really good about ourselves. Or we have unresolved traumas that, are leading to different behavioral outcomes and acting out and reactions and so forth. We're not feeling good about ourselves. That core of shame that people often struggle with. So there's this self-love. And then I was thinking about, again, this aspect of integrity related to principle, because we have to have some kind of a structure that guides us, both internal structure and external structure of action. And that really comes back to natural law and understanding cause and effect, understanding the Hermetic principles, and being aligned to principle, so that when we're at a crossroads, and every day, many times during each day, we come to a crossroad where we have a choice. Our life is filled with the eternal number of choices, and we have agency over those choices and how we think, feel, act. And that is the path of integrity that can keep us focused through principle. Maybe share a little bit about that and how it relates to the internal divide.
Yes. I'm going to kind of use a lot of symbolic, esoteric, to kind of relay this message. But if you understand the concept of darkness, how ignorance, how evilness, how chaos, a lot of people say that this world is ruled by, some form of darkness. So, we have to have that beacon of light. We have to have that torch, and I've always symbolized this torch, as a representation of light, of truth, and then also too of principles, because like Leslie just said, there's going to be that fork in the road sometimes, so sometimes we may have to make a decision, but what are you going to make your decision based off of? If you're going to just make your decision based off some form of egoic attachment, some form of emotional reaction, then sadly, it's possibly going to be the wrong choice. But if you have that foundation of hardcore, firm principles, then when it comes to that decision making as far as choices, then that's what's going to be that beacon of light in order to guide you in the moments of darkness. And mind you, we've all gone through moments of darkness in the past, a few years. It was those principles, those core boundaries, which help guide us, which help us stay true to ourselves. When we saw so many people held around us sacrificing those principles, sacrificing pieces of their self to go along, how to get along. And then, how it was in that moment, those principles are what we clutched on to. You see, it's okay to clutch on and hold on to your principles. That's completely different than, clutching on to some form of egoic attachment or materialism, because those principles are a part of you. Those are the boundaries. That's what's going to make up as for help make you up when it comes to building. And hell, like I've said, if you want to create anything with anyone, you have to have some form of foundation, because you have to communicate. If you are not on the same set of principles, then how are you truly going to communicate and build something that's going to be long lasting? You see, we are trying to build something that is going to be long lasting. We're not looking for little small time, short term form of freedom. We're talking about real freedom. We're not talking about freedom for a few years. We're talking about, something that is long lasting in longevity. So we've got to have those principles right there, because trying to build something on a rocky foundation, on sand, on something that's not going to sustain itself is not going to work. And we've seen this happen so many times, people trying to build things, people trying to communicate, people trying to build groups. Well, that's totally fine. But if y'all don't have those same set of core principles, how are you ever going to communicate? How are you ever really going to build something? It's not going to work, because you don't really know what this person's true purpose is, true goal is. So if you do have those set of core principles, then that's what's going to build that connection, because then you can build that connection with somebody else. Because you have that connection with yourself. So those principles are going to be that beacon of light in forms of darkness. Those principles, along with the truth, are going to be what guides you, because that's what's going to be what guides you to doing right action. And that's why the principles of how natural law have to be understood, how knowing how is right, hell and wrong. So when times get dark, then how what you are going to clutch on to. And it's not going to be, how your bank account. It's not going to be, how you trying to go out and get more booty, as people call it. But you're going to hold on to your principles, because that's going to be that light. That's going to be that torch. That's going to be your candle in forms of darkness to guide you on your own journey, to guide you on your own path.
Really well said. Thanks, Brandon.
Yeah, and we're about an hour and a half into it.
Final words.
That was like we could conclude that in and of itself, and yeah, it was so wonderful. And yeah, like we can end this episode. I would maybe have to do another one with you or someone else, but yeah, ending this with first things. That's what principles are, and the values, and like we're talking about eternal principles, non-man-made principles, and things that we can just align to. And like Leslie and I were talking about in the first discussion of the science of life, and Corey Ondrelit calls it naturosophy, which is I like that term as well, the naturality, natural law, all these things. And like, yeah, finding that unity consciousness within ourselves. We're going to take it back to the internal conflicts and division within oneself, and not understanding that, yeah, those two pillars of enlightenment, or just the two hemispheres of the brain, the masculine and feminine, and those sacred principles therein, as far as, the self-defense principle, the masculine, and the non-aggression, non-violent principle of the feminine, and how that plays out in that dynamic within oneself. And are they having non-violent communication within themselves? Are they upholding, the their constitution of their individual self, above, all the minutia out there, or distorted, views of, one's true authentic self from the external,
Yeah, I would just like to leave people with this invitation, is to just look at your own self in terms of your alignment of thoughts, feelings, and actions, and relate that to principles, the first principles. And there's a whole lot of growth and healing that can happen from that process. Yeah, it's been a great conversation. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yes. And thank you for having me on. And my closing words, it kind of reminds me of the meme, how the person asks who wants to change the world, then everyone, raises their hand. So then the next question is, well, who is willing to change themselves? And how no one holds up their hand. So that's really what we are trying to inspire, people to do, is look in the mirror, start with yourself, figure out, how can you become a better individual? If it's a better husband, a better wife, that's something that you have to decide for yourself. Start looking in the mirror, because too many people want to point their finger out toward, other people, but you really have to do this and start pointing it here. It all starts, ends, with the self. So that's going to be my closing words right there.
Awesome.
Yeah, Brandon, you've done some phenomenal work over the past couple of years, and yeah, you showed me the ropes yesterday on your beautiful studio setup, and this man's invested like countless hours and money in regards to, what you're, have built up already from a wonderful foundation. And I know you got a lot of natural law and all that good stuff. And can you please tell the wonderful folks out there still listening where they can find you, especially since YouTube loves you so much, they have to, keep you far away.
Oh, yeah,
And
man.
yeah, just what you've been up to. Maybe highlight some of the most recent works. You mentioned, yeah, the conference as well. I love your Lex Naturalis presentation as well, and Mayat versus Ishvet is great as well, which is why I wanted to have a chat with you to begin with. And yeah, it's all you, brother.
Thank you for those kind words. Yeah, people can find me on Odyssey. Odyssey is pretty much my main platform. How right now, I'm going to be in the works of creating my own website and trying to get my content uploaded on other platforms. Of course, you can find me on the One Great Work Network. You can find me on BitChute. I do have a YouTube channel, but I don't advocate anybody watch those videos, because YouTube is not worth the time in my view, and it's just straight garbage. Since I'm on my third channel, but yeah, that's where people can find me. And right now I'm working on a presentation which Derek kind of got to see some behind the scenes photos. It's going to be titled "Why Natural Law is Not a Religion." So it should be out possibly the end of this week. It's about 95% done, so and then also I've done a few group chats along with Chris Jansen, Crip Rick, Jim, and Jerry. How they are part of a group that I am in, that was created by Chris Jansen. And our first video was "What is a right?" So we kind of wanted to start off with a quick foundation, because a lot of people think they know what rights are, but they don't. So just kind of starting simple and a basic. And then we had a second video which Derek, joined us, and I'm sure we're going to have a second part to it, to where we talked about what is a man, because you see a lot of videos, you see how a lot of males who are, hell regurgitating, a male should be, a man should be a alpha male or a sigma male, but none of them ever really talk about going within themselves. None of them ever really talked about getting in touch, hell, with the feminine. None of them really even talking about being honest and maintaining your world. Help maintaining your word. So we was just, trying to talk about what are some of the real aspects of being a man. So yeah, I'm sure there's going to be a part 2 coming up soon, because we would like to get a lot of, great feminine wisdom, on that topic. So
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, and my website is livethrive.life, and I have an Odyssey channel as well, and I'm on the One Great Work Network. I also have a YouTube channel, but within like the first day, they deleted my corruption of care presentation, so
Yeah.
you can't find that there. So yeah, Odyssey, One Great Work Network, and my website are probably the best ways to get to my work. And I'm really excited to start this project here with Derek, and got a lot of ideas. So keep checking in on our dissolving the divide.
Yeah, most definitely. Thank you so much, everyone who tuned in. And yeah, much love and respect to Brandon, our guest today. Much love and respect to Leslie as well. And yeah, all the links for everyone's work is in the show notes description as usual. And I'm going to think of, some little reference or, learning tool as well. And Brandon, if you wanted to leave any links to specific videos that are really relevant to what we discussed today. I mean, you touched on a lot of stuff anyways. And yeah, just thank you again. I got nothing else to say. My works are where they're at. You can find them on ScrewTube and Odyssey and BitChute and all that. So yeah.
Awaken your mind.
Can I end it with a quote?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
And thank you for inviting me on. But yeah, the quote is by Manly P. Hall, and it is, "No one should have to be untrue to their self in order to be true to another."
Yeah. Great
Word.
quote. Yeah,
Brandon, thanks again. Thank you, Manly, the great granddaddy of the modern day philosophy and mystic and natural law, good stuff. So yeah, thanks again.
Yeah.
Thanks
out there.
Take care, everybody. Thank you for listening.
Peace out.
You got to take it deeper into the art and science. You must know thyself, and you must know your own psychology. You must know your own mechanics. You must know your own unique trajectory. It is time to take your power back. It is time to take your mind back. When Thoth, which literally means thought, betrayed wisdom, that is when all of this happened. And lastly, when your thought is not in alignment with proper knowledge and wisdom and truth, you are caught in all of the nets, traps, and snares set up by the house of the net. So know it.